Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. Today I'm going to be discussing the Hollywood portrayals of the Greek poet Homer, his the famous The Odyssey, his famous narrative of the wanderings of the Greek hero Odysseus. Now, uh, of course. Uh, the internet, everyone's excited, or there's been a lot of talk, discussions concerning Christopher Nolan's upcoming portrayal, which will be released in July, sometime in July this year, 2026. So just about 2 months away, right? In exactly 2 months, Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is going to be released, and I'm excited about its cast. Of course, Lupita Nyong'o is cast as Helen of Troy. She's a major character, but she doesn't feature. Actually, she doesn't. We don't have a lot of scenes of her in The Odyssey. So I don't know where the director might choose to start from. She only features. There's just one scene in which Odysseus' son Telemachus, when he's going to, he's looking for his father. He visits Menelaus. Right, Menelaus is the king of Sparta, and of course Helen of Troy is his wife. Those of us who remember Helen of Troy from the Trojan Wars from the Iliad, also written by Homer. She was the cause of she was the cause the catalyst, the cause of the Trojan War. Of course, it was because she had eloped. Right, she was a wife of the king of Sparta. That's Menelaus, but she eloped um, with Paris. Paris, who was the son of the king of Troy, that son of Priam. She eloped with him, and of course that instigated um, the the Trojan War. Um, but in any event, I don't know where Christopher Nolan might start his narrative of the Odyssey. The Odyssey, uh, it tells, in the book, it's giving a lot of narratives. It just provides background, what's going on, how things came to be, what happened, and whatnot. But um, Helen of Troy only features um, when Telemachus, who's the son of Odysseus, when he goes to visit Menelaus in Sparta. And of course, Helen of Troy is there. She's the wife of Menelaus. Um, but I find it interesting that one of my favorite actors, that's Matt Damon, will be playing the wizened Odysseus. Odysseus, of course, is a middle-aged man, right? He's a middle-aged man because he's lost. He'd been gone for about 20 years, 19 to 20 years. There's the Trojan War, and then he'd been cursed by Poseidon, the god of the seas, who's brother of Zeus, because he blinded his son, the Cyclops, Polyphemus, and so Poseidon curses Odysseus the to wander the seas, and to be gone from home for an additional 10 years. And we so with Homer takes us through his experiences, his wandering, his sojourn, and that's basically what the Odyssey is about. Interestingly, it's not the first time that Hollywood would be giving us this rendition, right? I'm sure there's probably been several others, but an epic, a major rendition was in 1954, a 1954 film called Ulysses. And I've seen that, right? I've seen it, and I decided to try and compare it to the book, how the book was. And of course, when we're looking at classics through the lens of Hollywood, there's a risk of distortion, sensationalism, due to artistic liberties of the director, and things are not properly depicted. But actually, I found that Ulysses did a very good job. Of course, there are many stories in the Odyssey, right? And he couldn't capture, the 1954 version could not capture every one of them. But it did a good job. It's summarized, it's a synopsis, a good summary of um, for Hollywood, right? For Hollywood consumption, right? For the cinema of the Odyssey. And by the way, he was called. It's called Ulysses. Ulysses is Odysseus. They're the same person. So Ulysses, I've done an earlier video in which I explained that the Latins, that's the Romans, right? They are the civilization that followed the Greeks, right? And they had studied the Greeks. Of course, Odysseus, Homer, those are the Greeks. They're the Greeks. And the Latins, who, of course, came about as a great civilization with the Roman Empire, liked to study the Greeks. And so they started to create a Latin Roman version of everything Greek. So they had their own Latin names. So Ulysses was the Latin name of Odysseus. In fact, they're gods as well. They created Roman names, Roman versions of Greek gods. So in the movie Ulysses the 1954 movie, Poseidon is called Neptune. They're the same person. So Poseidon, the god of the seas, the one who curses Odysseus. Odysseus, who's called Ulysses in the 1954 film, given his Latin name. He's called Neptune, right? In the 1954 film instead of Odysseus. So sorry, instead of Poseidon. Poseidon is his Greek name. Um, others, so but in terms of the portrayal of by the actor, I think Kirk Douglas did a fantastic job. He accurately depicted um, Odysseus, because Odysseus was a brash fellow. Um, he uh, Odysseus is what we'd call the modern anti-hero, right? He's not, when we think of the hero versus the villain. The hero doesn't have villainous traits. The hero is normally somebody who's selfless, right? He puts others before himself. He's disinterested, right? He's humble. He has all these noble qualities. But back then, for the Greeks, what they viewed as a hero was different. Now, I've done a video discussing Ajax. Ajax is another famous Greek tragedy, which was written by Sophocles, right? Odysseus features prominently in Ajax, right? Um, but Odysseus is the dramatic foil to Ajax, who was a traditional old order hero, right? He was the stereotypical hero, Greek hero, and who was rigid, followed the rules, who displayed certain virtuous characteristics and whatnot. But he's driven mad by Athena because he was jealous, right? He was jealous that Odysseus was the one who won the armor of the armor of Achilles, right, who'd been killed. And by the way, Achilles was a cousin of Ajax, but they were cousins, and Ajax was the greatest of the warriors apart from Achilles, because Achilles was actually a demigod, right? Achilles was a demigod. He was Achilles was a demigod. He was the son of Thetis, right? Thetis was a goddess, and the way Achilles, Achilles heel, the way he got his weakness, of course, he was killed through an arrow that pierced his heel. His mother, Thetis, who was a goddess, had slept with a King Peleus, who was the uncle of Ajax. And the mother wanted to make him a complete immortal, right? Because, he, instead of just a demigod. So she took him by the heel as a baby, dipped him in river Styx, and that was supposed to give him immortality. But the area she was holding with her hand, his heel, that was the only place in his body that did not, that was not immortalized. And so that became his weakness. And of course, that has entered English lexicon, Achilles' heel. And that's where he was killed when an arrow, Paris, right? Paris, who had eloped with Helen of Troy and was the cause of the war, of the whole crisis. Paris shot him with an arrow that pierced his heel, and that was the only way he could die. But Achilles was a demigod, and he was a cousin of Ajax, right? But Ajax, apart from Achilles, who was who had superhuman strength and all that, valor, all of that. Um, of all the other Greek warriors, Ajax was superior. But the gods, especially Athena, who was a god of war and wisdom, um, favored Odysseus, because Odysseus, he's also called Odysseus of the nimble wits. He was had this cunning intelligence, which Greeks, of course, valorize, right? Greeks were known for their intelligence, right, for their knowledge, for how they applied wisdom and things like that. And Odysseus sort of personified, he exemplified this. And so he was favored by Athena, and so he won the armor of Achilles, and that made Ajax jealous, and of course she drove him mad to sabotage, undermine his attempts to kill Odysseus and the other Greek kings, including Agamemnon and uh, Menelaus, right? Menelaus, that's the name, the husband of Helen of Troy. So, and that's Ajax, right? That's the story of Ajax. Um, these things sometimes they are related, right? They're just referenced in the book, the Odyssey, right? And but the main theme of the main because you can't really understand the Odyssey, Odysseus's journeys, right? His travails without the reference to the background, right? What had gone in other epics, in other tragedies, in the previous tales and previous stories, and so that's what you find in the book of the Odyssey. But let me discuss um, uh, Kirk Douglas's portrayal. Kirk Douglas did a magnificent job. It was like Odysseus was tailored for him, just like uh, and I would find out that Charlton Heston, right? The role of Moses was tailor made for him by Cecile B. DeMille, who was the director. And I always, many times, I don't think we'll ever see another portrayal of Moses that matches that of Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments. And I think our movie won so many awards, it broke records. Apparently, Cecil B. DeMille had only Charlton Heston in mind. It was tailor made for him, and because he thought Charlton Heston looked like Michelangelo's depiction of Moses, right? His statue of Moses that he made, and so which was in Rome. So that was and Charlton Heston did a fantastic job, right? He just nailed Moses. Similarly, I thought Kirk Douglas nailed the portrayal of what's his name, Odysseus. You will get the character of Odysseus because Odysseus he's brash, he's arrogant, he's mischievous. There's something mischievous about him, and he's charismatic and all of that. Um, when I saw the trailer of the Odyssey by Christopher Nolan, and I saw snippets of Matt Damon, and Matt Damon seemed pensive. Odysseus is not a pensive character. He's very confident, right? Sometimes when you're pensive, you're very reluctant. Odysseus is not reluctant. He's explosive. He's brash. Yes, he's cunning. He's always using his wits. He's always planning. But he's not the careful, cautious kind of person. And you see this in one of the errors he makes, right? After he deceives the Cyclops to, and he's blinded him, and him and his men have escaped to their ship, and as they're leaving, he's brash. He starts to shout, and he basically sabotages what he had done because I'll later on I'll narrate the story. He had told the giant, the Cyclops, Polyphemus, had told him his name was Nobody when the giant wanted to know his name. And so Odysseus had told him Nobody, right? And so after he had been blinded and he was screaming that because Polyphemus had trapped them in their cave, right? And so he's screaming, and then he's the other Cyclops who were his neighbors outside. They heard him. They were trying to come and give him assistance, and they were like, what's going on, who's killing you, and he goes, nobody is killing me, nobody's killing me. So they think, okay, that he's just shouting for nothing, and they're confused and they go away, right? Because uh, the Cyclops had asked for Odysseus's name, and Odysseus told him his name was Nobody. So that was brilliant. But Odysseus was so brash, right? So brash, so arrogant, so he somewhat compulsive, right? So even though he manages to escape and they're in the ship, but he just had to. He's so mischievous. He just had to get what show. Let him know that he wanted the Cyclops to know who it was that had bested him, that had defeated him, that had blinded him. And so he shouts and tells him that I am Odysseus, the sacker of Troy, the destroyer of cities, the king of Ithaca. He lets him know, he's shouting. So you see his arrogance. So I hope um, Matt Damon is able to portray this. And you see Kirk Douglas, when he did it so perfectly. You could just see that, yes, that's Odysseus. He's brash. He's in your face. Even though he's always using his wits, but he's quick. It just comes naturally to him. But he's mischievous with it. And of course, that was because he now revealed his name to Cyclops. The significance is that, okay, Cyclops now begs his father Poseidon, because Cyclops is Poseidon's son. So he begs his father to curse Odysseus, and which he does, and that was what led to his travails. His uh, being lost, and so basically held captive for 10 years on the sea, right? So at sea. Um, so Kirk Douglas does a fantastic job. For people who don't remember Kirk Douglas is actually was the father, he's late now. He died at 103 years old. He lived very long. He was the father of Michael Douglas. We know Michael Douglas. He's old now. But Michael Douglas was a star back then when he was in his 40s. I remember watching Romancing the Stone. It's still one of my favorites. One of the best romantic comedies made, because it had drama. It was a great thriller. I loved it. Great acting. He had the charisma of his father. By the way, Michael Douglas is a spitting image of Kirk Douglas, and it's interesting. Douglas is also very famous for, in the 80s, 90s, was a very famous actor. One of my favorite movies, The American President. He nailed it, right? He acted the American President, which was directed by Rob Reiner. Rob Reiner, unfortunately, was recently killed by his son. In December 2025, his son's still facing criminal charges. He's at trial. Um, Rob Reiner, by the way, also directed. He also directed A Few Good Men. So there are people who would be able to nail that role of Odysseus. So you've got to be brash, you've got to be cocky, you've got to that's Odysseus. Odysseus was brash, he was cocky, and his son would his son have been able to do a good job of, yeah, I think his son, because his son is very cocky as well. Well, his son is more notable for his steamy roles, by the way, that he played in the 90s. He did Basic Instinct. We know Basic Instinct. If you haven't seen it, you can go and watch it. He and Sharon Stone. And then something similar, Fatal Attraction, he and Glenn Close. So he did all these steamy movies that had the femme fatale. That was very popular in the 80s slash 90s. The femme fatale, which is interesting because the story of the Odyssey. I mean, Homer's epics. They've been criticized as casting women in this femme fatale, this troublemaker, this uh, evil doers kind of um, image, which is what seems to be going on in the Odyssey. By the way, the Odyssey, he's you see Odysseus is and he's not had, but he's held hostage by various women, by Circe. She's called Circe. Circe is a witch, is a sorceress. Um, Circe in the Greek, by the way, in Greek it's called Kirki, right? Kirki, but it's spelled. So I'm just gonna keep it at the give us the English pronunciation, and then Calypso. Calypso is a goddess who uh, holds him captive for 7 years on her island, and it's interesting. Each time he's held captive, he has to make love. He's forced. Well, I'm not say forced, he has to make love to these women. So he's making love, even though he's supposed to be longing for his wife. He's a married man. So you see why we call him an anti hero who represents moral flexibility. He's the epitome of moral flexibility. That's Odysseus. Um, and In fact, I should do another video discussing, feminism and the way women are portrayed in Homer's epics. That's the Odyssey and the Trojan War in the Iliad, if we recall that it was also like a woman, Helen of Troy, who was supposed to be the source of the war, the conflict, right? Where she eloped when she eloped with Paris. She was the wife of Menelaus, who was king of Sparta. The one she eloped with Paris, and the Trojans are holding her, and it leads to war. So there are many things that Homer's epics, the Greek epics, you also represent, right? And I'll do discussions. For instance, um, some people think Homer's epics are just basically saying women are bad, women are terrible, they're the source of conflict, they're manipulative and all that. Well, people actually see the underlying narrative of Homer's epics. It's really about hospitality. You see that in uh, the through line is hospitality from the Iliad, right? So Paris had been it insulted the hospitality of the Spartans, right? The Spartan king was insulted, right, when his wife, was taken captive by Paris. You don't go to a man's house or another man's house and then you abscond with their wife. So it's all about hospitality, and you see uh, Odysseus mentions hospitality a lot, and you see it in the Odyssey when Odysseus, when he went into the cave of the Cyclops, right? The Odysseus actually offered to stay instead of just stealing his provisions, his supplies, the cheese, and just running away to his ship. He decided to stay because he thought, well, it was a Greek, it was Greek culture, right, for people to be hospitable, right? And he thought, okay, that he owes them. They had the rules and laws of hospitality, that he would be hospitable to them. They were travelers, and that was why he waited. Instead, the Cyclops held them captive, and he ate some of it. So he ate some of the men because he was a giant, right? He was a giant Cyclops. He killed some of the men, bashed their heads, and then he ate them and held them captive, right? And he would feed on them, go out, come feed on them. So and then we go back to another scene showing the abuse of hospitality, because when Odysseus was gone, he left his wife Penelope, and then of course his heir is Telemachus. So there are these suitors, over 100 of them. They came and they were eating Telemachus, as he put it, out of house and home, right, or hearth, out of house and home, They abused his hospitality. They slept with his maids, 12 of them. And, basically, so you see the theme of hospitality is very significant in Homer's epics. And it's not really so much about sending a message that women are evil. Of course, it's a Greek classic, so there's the elements of patriarchy in it. I'll do another video explaining, just trying to compare um, the the feminist view of the misogyny in the Odyssey. But in any event, the femme fatale, the steamy, you see, there's a lot of steaminess. Well, he's not being graphic, but he does say that uh, Odysseus is, he's every night he's sleeping with Circe, right? Where when the sorceress, she holds him captive for a year. Actually, he did that willingly, right? He slept with her willingly for a year. And I think she conceived and bore him a child. And she let him go. She let him go. And because the gods would intervene. Hermes favored him. Was the god of, he's one of the sons of Zeus, but he's the god of, he's a messenger, he's a god of traveling, right? So Odysseus was supposed to be traveling, even though he was cursed. He had been cursed by Poseidon, but every time he's held captive, the gods would intervene. And particularly Odysseus was favored by the goddess of war. That's Athena. Athena was the goddess of war and wisdom. So she intervenes a lot. So the story is a lot about Odysseus as it is about Athena's intervention. She appears every now and then and she aids him, or she gives him advice. Hermes also helps him as well. I'll do another video and provide the stories in more detail. But I just wanted to discuss the Hollywood depiction. I thought Kirk Douglas did a fantastic job. Kirk Douglas also, the language in which he spoke. Uh, so the classics, even though they're done, the classics, even though originally they were written and dramatized in either Latin or the Greek or the Greek language, later on, of course, those of us in the Western, living in the Western world or English speaking world, we appreciate the classics when it's done, when it's narrated, when it's depicted, represented in the Queen's English or the King's English today, as they call it. Um, I loved The Gladiator because, well, Russell Crowe is Australian, New Zealand, or whatever, so he's British, he speaks English in a certain way, right? So it made us appreciate it, especially consider the role of Joaquin Phoenix, who was playing Commodus, the Emperor. Joaquin Phoenix is an American, but if you notice, he portrays that character using some sort of a British accent. You would have thought he was an Englishman had you not known that Joaquin Phoenix is actually American. He was born in America. So I think for the classics, they're better dramatized using the Queen's English or the King's English rather than an American voice, an American tone. They just don't, they're not portrayed well with the American guttural or the American accent. And I think that was one of the other things I was wondering, as I was watching the trailer uh, depicting Matt Damon as Odysseus, I thought I heard him murmuring, muttering under his breath, in a guttural way. And I thought, okay, he's not going to do a good job if he's using an American accent. He's not going to do a good job because the classics were written to be performed, right, dramatized, and you could see the way. And Kirk Douglas did a fantastic job, right? He's clear, he's vocal, you can't be mumbling the classics, right? When you're acting them, whether you're in Hollywood, it's not one of those things that you get away. Like what's his name, Marlon Brando, one of my favorite actors, who did great in Godfather. He would never succeed in a portrayal of the classics. Because Marlon Brando used to murmur, he used to mumble, he sort of slurred his words, whatever. He would not, he would fail in a portrayal of the classics. He wouldn't be able to do it. So you need that dramatic tone. Well, anyway, that's what I have to say regarding the films, the 1954 film Ulysses, which actually was the Odyssey. Ulysses, again, that's in Latin, the Roman name of Odysseus. Uh, in any event, I'll keep you posted. I'll do another video and I'll narrate, just give some of the different scenes of the Odyssey, from the book. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.